So some of you know I'm a big Harry Potter fan. And so last year in November, I finally got this. So there's my wife and I dressed up as Arthur and Molly Weasley in our Weasley mobile.
That's so awesome.
That's more than a big Harry Potter fan.
Yeah, we're pretty fanatical. Our whole Instagram, if you want to follow it, is Alder Hollows, and it is just Harry Potter stuff. But one of the cool things is if you like LabVIEW and like Raspberry Pis, this was a Weasley clock. For those of you that don't know what the Weasley clock is, it's a clock that tracks your family's place, their position. And we made our own that was based off of our phone's GPS. So that's a hand for my wife and I and my 2 kids. And it actually updates live based on geofencing and receives messages and moves the hands around accordingly. So that was pretty fun. I did a presentation on that at the first GLA summit. So the video's out there. And yeah, so that's actually programmed in LabVIEW. So let's go to the actual topic at hand. So this is kind of an interesting presentation. There's no slides. This is all written in LabVIEW. It's Actor Framework and Panel Manager. It is a touchscreen interface. So I have the touchscreen here. The touchscreen is connected to this laptop that is running the software. And then this computer is connected to the projector that's running this camera so that you could actually see me poking the buttons and doing everything. So it is a weird setup, but I think it is cooler this way. Let's see, let me back it up just a little bit so you can see the menu button in the corner. So here we go. A little bit of introduction first off. So these are all written, like I said, all written in LabVIEW. These are all things that I have downloadable and stuff. So these little buttons here. Here's about me. I work at Testeract. You've probably seen a number of us around. We have quite a big presence here at the conference. I'm a certified LabVIEW architect and I'm a LabVIEW champion. Here's how you can get a hold of me. There's my Testeract email address. Personal email address. I used to do a lot of consulting on the side before I joined Testeract. And there's my LinkedIn. Now on these, you might notice that as I press these buttons, the other ones disappear. There's going to be something I'm going to talk about later that has to deal with this. A problem that I ran into here is there wasn't a way to change the Z order. So if I didn't make the other ones disappear, there was always one that might be on top of the other, and so you would still see the buttons sitting there. Now, there's a little bit more I'll tell about later that could fix this in the future, but I'm really involved in the LabVIEW community. I'm a director at QControl. I write a lot for the LabVIEW Wiki. I'm a board member on the GLA Summit, and I'm just participating in a lot of things. And then last, here's some of the open source toolkits that I published that are out there. Some of you may or may not know about QControls. A lot of this presentation leverages QControls. How many of you heard of XControls? Okay. How many have heard of QControls? Oh, good. So there's quite a few. So QControls is basically an alternative to XControls that I think is a lot better, a lot safer to use. XControls tend to be crashy and have some issues and that. So QControls is a better option, especially if you're working with libraries or object-oriented, QControls is the way to go. So this isn't a presentation on QControls, but because I use so many of them, I wanted to introduce what QControls were. So it's an object-oriented alternative to XControls. So the niche that XControls fills is a way to encapsulate and make, highly customizable UIs, like very dynamic and stuff like that, and make it so it's easy to reuse. The problem is XControls tend to be crashy, especially in libraries or classes. So I've been developing QControls since 2012. Come 2015, that's when I first packaged it into a VIPM package that you can install. In 2018, I won the Community Contribution Award here at, it was NI Week then. I think that was the second to last NI Week. And then right now it works for 2015 and newer, but I'm thinking of making some changes and upgrading it. So it might be here soon. It might be 2020 and newer. And so there's the link to where you can get it. And some of these things on here that I show are QControls, like here's a pie chart that you can click on. And basically you just give the pie chart an array of numbers and it draws it as a percentage of 100%. There's a color selector here that you can drag around. There's a calendar. So this calendar is basically the same calendar you see in the pop-up when you do a timestamp, but I liberated it and made it a QControl so that you could put it right on your front panel. There's also this rich text box, so I can select this and say, I want this to be, I should have used the color selector for this, but make it, oh, I didn't get it. It's hard. This one's not really designed for a touchscreen, but anyway, you know, can do font and bold and italic and all sorts of stuff with the rich text box one. So what do I actually want to talk about today is creating a user interface that is ideal for like a touchscreen, very similar to what you're used to on smartphones, tablets, things nowadays. You know, some of the do's are, you know, use standard iconography. Don't try to reinvent stuff. People are used to how like menu buttons look. They're used to how power buttons look. They're used to those kind of things. Add swishiness. Now that's my technical term to all of the animations and stuff that give feedback to the user that they clicked on something, they moved something, whatever that's going to happen. You know, when you're not working with a mouse, it's hard to know, did I click on that button or not, you know? Use splitters. Splitters is like the only way to make a really nice dynamic, responsive UI. You know, you have to use splitters, split up your user interface, make sure you align the controls and make the controls resize with the panel. And that goes along with, you know, limit one per pane. One control per pane makes it really easy to make it resize and to have it stay looking nice. Make animations timing based. The reason why I say this is I once created an animation where I had a really cool VI fade in and I had it do it based on iterations. So it basically took 100 iterations for it to fade in. Well, I had a really nice computer, so it faded in really nice on my computer. But then I gave it to my customer and it took a nice 30 seconds to fade in on his computer. So if you make it timing based, then if they have a slow computer, then it just pops open. You know, it doesn't end up affecting anything having that animation in there. Minimize clicks. What I mean by this is if you're going to design a really nice user experience in a touchscreen app, you want to try to minimize how they get into things. You know, you can't use right-click menus. You want to make it so that they don't have to go searching for stuff. You know, you want to try to minimize how much they need to do. Another thing is, you know, I said add swishiness, but don't use too much, you know. That just starts to be a distraction. Don't make UI elements too small. Like you saw with my other ones that weren't made for touchscreen, I couldn't poke them. You know, it was too hard to get in there. One of the things that I've had to deal with is like the menu bar. The standard menu bar on a touchscreen is hard to use. You know, you want to do something else to make a menu bar. Tab controls. Tab controls don't resize very easily. They don't make resizable UIs. So if you're going to use tab controls, just use them as the tabs themselves and then do a sub-panel kind of thing to actually change the page so that you can make your UI resize. Again, make animations iteration based, or don't make them iteration based. And don't stuff too many things on the screen, you know? I know that kind of goes against the don't make too many clicks, because, you know, that's kind of a trade-off there you're going to have to do. You're going to have to decide how to make the navigation to the things that are used most easy. And then maybe you'll have to hide some of the things that aren't used as much in, you know, configuration screens or pop-up dialogues or things like that. Okay. So one of the things I want to talk about first is animations. So how many of you have heard of easing functions? Okay, not very many. Easing functions are basically built-in functions. Well, not built-in, but they're pretty standardized functions, I guess I would say, of how to make animations kind of flow right. And they're mathematical equations. And you can see in this corner, you can see the, let's see, it's not cut off, is it? No, okay, good. You can see the, basically the profile of the function. So for example, here is, I'm going to move a button around as I click it. So, you know, moving it around just linearly, not very interesting. But there's other things that you can do, like let's move it so that it starts off slow and gets faster. Or we can change it around and say, let's have it start fast and then slow down. You know, that's more visually interesting to the user, is using that. Some of these other ones down lower here are even more fun, like have it overshoot and then come back. So all of these easing functions and stuff, and the things that I'm doing is in a published library right now on VIPM. I've published it so that you guys can just grab it and take these VIs. And there's VIs in there for saying, I want to move a control around. And you just wire the reference to the control. You wire an enum saying what easing function you want. You wire your starting and ending positions. And then it handles all of the math to move it and that. Oh, and you do have an option of wiring how long do you want it to take. So another fun one is the bounce. So there's for position. You can add these to size too. I don't know how well this is going to work for size, but we'll try it. So, you know, let's do a different one. Let's do the elastic. So that one kind of overshoots, and that's why it does the weird thing at the end there, but that's okay. Sometimes doing them in and out doesn't make sense, but you know, you still can have it both-sided. So one way that I'll use this on a touch screen, like you saw maybe on my other screens, when I touched a button, it would jiggle a little bit so that I knew that I touched it. So here I have a jiggle. And let's see, hopefully the sound's on. Show you that real quick, a little bit more of it jiggling and running away from me. So this is a good practical joke if you, oh, there it goes. So there we go. There's some fun of that going. We'll get this lined up better. There we go. Okay. Now that we have that going, let's move on to swiping. So this, my wife said this will date me, you know. If you know who this is from a kid cartoon. This is Swiper, and they would always say Swiper, no swiping. But anyway, what I wanted to show you is this menu bar here. And it lets you swipe and move around. It lets you drag and let it go, and it bounces back. It has a slowdown where it will slow down and stop. And then obviously you can click on the buttons, and these go to various web pages, as you can see. So you can think of, okay, that shouldn't be that hard to do, right? Well, there ends up being a lot of steps to something like that, because you have to program the move. So here's, you know, basically I have two different parts to this. I have the QControl part, and then I have a library that does a lot of the other swiping animation stuff. And so here's the code for the QControl. Here's, let's see. Oh, here's the code for starting the move. If you overshoot, it has to kind of go off a little bit and then bounce back. And so there's code in the QControl for that and code in the library for that. When you're dragging, it has to do kind of a mouse move and let you move it around. So as you're moving around, there's a slow down step. So as soon as you mouse up, essentially, if it has some momentum to it, it has to know that it's got that momentum and have a slow down routine. And let's see, here's my slow down routine. It moves until it either overshoots or it stops. And then if it overshoots, it has to go back into the overshoot routine. The spring back is if you drag it and you let go, it will spring back. And then obviously finally just the single mouse down click to do the selection. So there's a lot to it, but once you download a toolkit, like go get the swipe bar QControl, you can reuse this, replace it with your own buttons, and then have all that functionality already. All right, other UI elements. So there's a big list here, and I haven't implemented them all. But these, if you go Google these are like the standard user interface components that web pages have, smartphones, tablets, all sorts of things. So I did implement a few of them, like a breadcrumb trail. So here we go. It's going to bring up my hard drive here. Let's see, I'm going to click in to where my code is for this presentation. So here's the easing functions. There's all the easing function VIs. Let's say I want to back up. Here's the actual breadcrumb along the top. So let's see, let's go back to code. Here's my code for the QControl Toolkit. Go back up. Here's the smartphone-like UIs. Oop, I got the swiping function instead. So I almost made this list a little too small for my finger, but anyway, just to show you that it builds up the breadcrumb trail and then allows me to click back and say, okay, I want to go to there. I also made it smart where you can say, give it to me in other forms. Use different delimiters. And then ultimately what it's going to give you back, the breadcrumb, it's obviously not handling the navigation and everything. All it's doing is it tells you which one you clicked on. And it returns an event saying you clicked on code. And then you have to keep track of that and then go back and say, okay, now I'll navigate back to code or whatever I'm going to use that breadcrumb trail for. Icons. So there's a nice library out there called the Open Source Icon Library that it's free for any kind of use. And here's a whole bunch of them. I have this randomly generate this icon graphic array on the right-hand side. But the Open Icon Library is a really nice one. All of these tools that I have on here are free. Paint.net is kind of like a Photoshop-like application. Now, it may not be as feature-rich, but hey, it's free. So it's a free tool. Lunacy, Icon 8 Lunacy. I know that some people like Inkscape, which is lower down, for doing like vector graphics and stuff. But I'm a mechanical engineer, so I think very additive and subtractive kind of thing, like doing a solid model. And Lunacy has those same kind of tools. So when I'm drawing like a vector graphic, I can draw a square and then draw a circle and then say, now subtract the two. And it does that kind of stuff. And I make really nice vector graphics and icons and all sorts of graphics for my UI that way. Figma is another free one. Well, I guess I don't know if it's still free now that I can't remember who bought them. But anyway, if it's still free, it basically is a way to do like layouts and stuff. And you can do mock-up layouts. It's really meant for web pages, but it's really good for UIs too. Inkscape, like I said, Inkscape's a really good one for doing vector graphics. It's a little bit more complicated. If you're willing to learn the more complicated, I'm sure you'd love the features that you get with it. GIMP is another free Photoshop type software. Canva does layouts, has a lot of pre-formed stuff, but it's another way to lay out a bunch of stuff. And then Blender, if you really get into it, Blender is a free 3D modeling application. And it's not really geared towards engineering, it's more geared toward animation, but still it's a really nice one that's out there. Input fields. So this is a problem that you would have with touchscreens is, okay, I need to be able to type, but there's no keyboard. Well, you could use the Windows keyboard and type something. But this is going to give your user all of the options that you would with a regular keyboard. You know, if you don't want them to like get into the settings or press the Windows button or anything like that, then what I ended up doing, let's see if I can close that. We ended up rolling our own. And so here's our own keyboard, whatever. It has stuff like long hold for selecting and cutting, and a long press for pasting, shift and caps locks and everything. The nice thing about having a dedicated one like this is you can have something different. So I forgot to let it keep the text, enter there. You can have a different one for, you know, a numeric entry versus a string entry or whatever. So, you know, whatever. And then you can also implement it for things other than string controls. Like here I have a multi-com list box. I'm going to click on that cell and it knows that I got this on here. I'm going to delete that. So delete it all. Let's do 42, enter. And then it replaces that text in that cell. So just something to think about if you want to lock out your user, maybe have your touchscreen thing running more in a kiosk mode that your user can't touch anything else, then you might want to consider rolling your own keyboard. A loader or a throbber. This is for like an indeterminate, something that's going to take an indeterminate amount of time. You can actually put animated GIFs on your front panel. Now, there's a caveat to that. Older GIFs work, newer GIFs don't. And I don't know why that is. I talked to some computer scientist friends, and they think that under the hood, newer GIFs aren't really animated GIFs in the sense that they used to be. So here's, I'm going to turn this one on. So here's some animated GIFs. One thing that's nice about animated GIFs is you can put them in a ring control. So you can have multiple different ones. And then you can just control the visibility when you want to show it or hide it. So now one problem I ran into is when I was working for the Air Force, they locked down the operating system, and I don't know what they did, but the animated GIF engine, whatever runs animated GIFs behind the scenes, was locked out. And all of a sudden, my dialog box just had this big black box in the middle of it. And so I had to go figure out a different way to implement it. So I implemented it as a ring control with a whole bunch of pictures in it. And by doing that, I then cycle through that picture ring control and do the animation. And so I've since packaged that up as the animation QControl. And so you just put in a whole bunch of intermittent pictures in there like you're making your own cartoon, and then run it, and you can control the frame rate and everything with that QControl. So this is a good way to show that your user that, okay, you're busy, something's going on, but we don't know exactly how long it's going to take or when it's going to finish. Go into modal elements. So most of the time when you launch a dialog box, you know, it's modal, it's stuck, you know, you have to press, that's one of my cats on there. You have to press a button in order to dismiss it, right? So a lot on a tablet, you see this a lot of times where the dialog box is dismissible. So even though this is a pop-up VI, There's actually a event that you can get called VI dismissed or excuse me, disactivation. And so you can watch for that and you can say, oh, if this VI gets deactivated, it means that it's no longer the front focus. It just lost focus. So when I click on that, it says, okay, I clicked outside of it and it dismisses the dialog box. There's some caveats to how to work with that, like in the actor framework, because that's not one of the events that are allowed in like an actor core VI. There's other tricks you have to do. But if you're just running a regular plain old VI, then you can just watch for this. Just make sure you limit it to one, because if you don't limit it to one, it might enqueue more than one, and then your UI just comes and closes. And then every time you open it, it enqueued another one because it closed, and then it opens and closes again. So you just have to be careful about that. Okay, the last one I did here is called a picker. You're probably used to seeing these. Looks like it's a drum that has numbers on it that you can cycle through. So, you can go to specific day, month, and year, and you can see my calendar updated to that too. This is one that they have for selecting a list for states or countries a lot. So, going up, we'll select New York here for some reason. We'll go through countries. Oh, I went fast here. Let's see. Let's pick Tanzania for some reason. Anyway, that's something you might want to consider instead of like a regular drop-down control or like a enum, because those are kind of small to click on. This lets your user have something bigger to click on. All right, how am I doing on time? Oh, I still have a half an hour. Nice. Well, we'll give you lots of opportunity to ask questions, so. Okay, multi-touch. Now, touchscreens have multi-touch, but LabVIEW doesn't inherently have multi-touch. It's not built in. So this company called Alldredge actually makes a toolkit and wraps up the Windows functions that exist to do multi-touch. And it's not a free toolkit, but you can go download it here. There's their web page and their where you can get it on vipm.io. And it basically, in Windows 7 and newer, it wraps those things up and it lets you use the multi-touch functions. So, why would you want to use the multi-touch functions? Here's an example that I put on the screen. Let's pretend you have a safety situation where you need to make sure the technicians' hands are free of something that's about to close or press or something. You can see here, I can't reach both of these buttons with one hand. So this physically requires me to remove my hands from whatever that safety situation is, press both of these buttons, and hold it for 5 seconds while whatever is closing and starting up the machine. And then once it's started, then I can let go. Now, using their toolkit is really cool because it lets you do this. There's some other things I'm going to show in just a minute, but it circumvents the clicking of the mouse. So now if I go try to click on something, it's not going to let me click on it. So I have to actually disable the multi-touch. And now I can go and navigate back to other stuff. It wouldn't have let me do that without disactivating it first. So let's see. So that's a good reason to use the multi-touch. I use it in one more thing on here for all these gestures. So here I have some pictures of mine from the Harry Potter world. I'm going to turn on this swipe here. Lets me swipe through my pictures. So I have quite a few on here. I got the train, and the Hogwarts castle, and so on. And then I've got some other things on here like zoom. So on this one, you want to come in here and you want to do multi-touch and zoom in. And then let's go to pan here and pan over so we can see the sorting hat. And then let's turn on the tilt so that we can rotate. and so on. So this is really just a picture control under the hood, but I'm using the gestures from their toolkit to, do some operations in the picture control, make it zoom and do all of that sort of thing. Can come and swipe to the next picture and so on. So really cool thing to be able to do. And I went through this a lot quicker than I was expecting to, even with the crash, but that's okay. I didn't skip anything, did I? No, I did not. Oh, see how I told you I didn't deactivate it? See, I can't click on these guys. I forgot. I have to come up here and go click off that. And now I can click on that. So just something you have to keep in mind if you use their toolkit. So here's my wish list that I wish LabVIEW would have, all right, in order to make UIs a lot better. I think that the people have this kind of misconception in the community, in the community in the LabVIEW world that LabVIEW can't do modern UIs. It really can. I mean, you can make your UIs pretty, you can organize them right, you can, do all sorts of things. But here's the things that I think it has limitations. One of them is it doesn't handle vector graphics. Now, it does handle some of, what are they called? I can't remember. There is one form of vector graphics.
SVG.
What's that?
Is it SVG?
It's not SVGs. It can't handle SVGs. It handles another one that is kind of archaic that it's hard to use because I even tried to use a converter to convert something into one and LabVIEW still wouldn't run it. But some of the buttons and stuff use it so that they can grow and not look all pixelated. I can't remember what that format is called right now though. As you noticed when I was zooming in and messing around with the graphic, it started to get pixelated. The picture control is not very high resolution. I wish the picture control had better resolution because then we could do a lot of user interfaces in the picture control. You can track your mouse moves, you can track your mouse clicks in a picture control and make that be your user interface if you want to. If you really want something very elaborate, or if your user wants something very specific, you can make a picture control be the control if you want. Easy responsive design. Right now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term responsive design. Have you heard that term before? Okay, for those of you that aren't web developers, responsive design refers to how components in the web page move around depending on if you're, in mobile versus in a PC or a tablet, and how things move from columns to rows and vice versa. There's not a nice way to do that. I know that they were trying to tackle that in NXG, but without NXG, basically the best we can do is splitting your pane up into multiple, or your panel up into multiple panes with splitters and having the splitters resize and move around in a certain way. But that doesn't let you reposition things depending on if it's a mobile versus not. And so if you really had the need to have that ability, which I think most of us don't, so luckily it's not that big of a priority. But if you had that need, then maybe you'd need to end up programming multiple screens, depending on if it was going to be a desktop or a mobile. But beyond that, one thing that I do see a lot is just needing to resize the screen. You might want to have it be full screen and then have it pop out and move your screen over here and have it be just on a quarter of the display and then pop another screen out and have it over here, That's all stuff that you can do with Panel Manager and Actor Framework. And that's when you want to start kind of thinking about having things resize. If you want a good example of that, not that I'm trying to be a salesman in this presentation, but look at our Tesseract's task UI. That's what we have already built in, is something that lets you do that kind of thing. Another thing that I wish we had was programmable decals. Right now on a button, you can't change the decal on a button programmatically. And it would be really nice to be able to set up, okay, I want this to be an OK button with a check this time, but I want it to be a play button next time and have a triangle, or I want it, but you can't do that. The best you can do is have overlapping buttons and hide them. So make decorations are easier to work with. Now, a decoration is like, having a box, just a colored box on your front panel with controls over it so that you can like chunk something on your front panel to make it easy to understand that those things go together. But let's say you want that box to change color based on some kind of status. Well, if it's a decoration, it's really hard to get the reference to that box. If you go in the VI server and you're doing stuff to manipulate your front panel, you can get a reference to all of the decorations in your front panel, but it comes up as an array. And that array is in Z order, whatever that means. And basically it means the last one you put down is the first one in the list. And the first one you put down is the last in the list. So it's really hard to find out which decoration is which.
I will just add that depending how far back you go in LabVIEW versions, if you pull up some very old VIs and they have decorations, they won't show up in that list.
Oh, interesting. He's saying that if you are working on really old VIs and you pull up and you're trying to manipulate the decorations, sometimes the decorations won't even show up in that list. So I wish there was an easier way to manipulate and work with decorations. Tab controls. So if you want to do a tab control and you want to make a resizable UI, good luck. So what I suggest, like I suggested earlier, use the tabs and then put everything in subpanel based on what tab is selected. That makes it easier to resize. But I want that I would have from like LabVIEW R&D is make the tabs act like a pane. Have it resize maybe to the whole pane that it's in, and then have each of the tabs be its own little sub pane that you can use splitters in and everything else, just like it was a pane. Because then you can make things resize within the tab control easier. Right now, if you want to have controls inside of the tab control and make it resizable, you have to programmatically control it all. You have to go set positions and sizes and everything, which is a pain. Pun kind of intended. One of the tools that's really nice out there, it's not one of my tools, it's made by Hope Harrison when she was at JKI. It's called Pain Relief. It's downloadable on vipm.io. And it basically brings up a small little diagram of all your panes and splitters and lets you select them and do all of the properties and stuff really easy to set those things. So if you're going to do this, definitely get that tool. Make multi-touch gestures a regular thing and have it be like regular events. So instead of just having mouse down, there ought to be like, multi-click and give you the coordinates of all of the clicks, in an array or something. Just stuff like that would make it so that we could do a lot of cool stuff for our user interfaces. Make cursors work in subpanels. So if you try to set a cursor to busy inside of a subpanel, you'll get an error. The reason why is because that subpanel wants the reference to the top level VI in order to do that. And that goes for if you want to set it to, do the set and unset to busy. That goes if you want to set the cursor to be some other cursor look. For example, like for the breadcrumb, you don't want it to show up as text, even though that is a text box. You want it to show up as a hand to click. You can't set that when it's in a subpanel. Now there are ways around it. If you're using Panel Manager, there's built-in functions in Panel Manager that basically let you set those things, and then it really is setting it at the top level under the hood for you. So that's one workaround, but I wish that would work better. Same thing with coordinates in subpanels. Like if you want to have a pop-up, like one thing that I'll do a lot is when you click on something and you have a pop-up come up in front of it. Like let's say I'm editing a string in a multi-column list box. Like I have a multi-column list box, I want to edit one cell. I'll click in that cell, and then I want to have a string control pop up right above it. And it's really hard to get those coordinates right. Let's say like the one that I've implemented just recently, that string control is actually in its own VI, and it's almost like it's a dialog box sitting above it. But with it being in a subpanel, the coordinates are all screwy because you can't get the coordinates of the pane in the subpanel. It's really bad. Again, Panel Manager has built-in tools that help you out with that. So that makes it really nice. Windows transparency. You can't make a window partially transparent. There's some tricks with inside of Windows that you can set a specific color to be transparent, but it has no alpha channel, so you can't do any kind of blending or shadows or anything like that. So you can make like a splash screen pop up and have it be a weird shape, but you have to color the outside of it some weird, like maybe magenta color, and then tell through Windows calls, DLL calls, set that color to be the transparent color for that window, and then it will work. Control and indicator transparency. Right now, that's something you just can't do. Now, you can save a partially transparent PNG and have that be the background of your control or indicator, and that makes it look like it's kind of fading in or out, but you can't like control the fade. And it would be really nice to be able to have that effect, to have certain things just fade in, or you know, when it's not the thing with focus, maybe that thing is partially faded out while the thing with focus is totally faded in. You know, that's something I'd like to be able to do. The last one with the Z order programmatic control. This is something that they've actually added since I wrote this presentation. And right now, I think it is in LabVIEW 2024, but it's a special INI that you have to enable in order to use it. And I don't know 100% what that is. I'll have to Google it to remember or start asking around. But I know it exists because I remember them telling me that was actually a thing now. I just need to remember what it is. But yeah, that is something that actually exists now. So that kind of finishes off what I had planned. Is there any questions?
What operating system are you running? What OS? What operating system are you using on your tablet?
So, well, this isn't a tablet. This is just a touch screen that's attached to my laptop. So it's just Windows 7. Or no, it's Windows 11, excuse me. It's Windows 11. Yeah, this is just an extra touch screen, not a self-running tablet. So
that file format is EMF.
Oh, thank you for looking that up. He said the file format that you can still use in LabVIEW on front panels is EMF.
But apparently people hated it in 2008. So
yeah, it's pretty old.
It won't do gradients.
It says people have hated it since 2008 and it won't do gradients. So
there's apparently a toolkit that loads SVG.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, it's $200.
Okay, he says that there is a toolkit out there that someone has written to load SVGs, but it's $200.
So you mentioned that like the QControls and the picture controls, they kind of seem like they relied on Windows drivers. We use a lot of ShireyStudios that are hooked up, that use Linux for the ShireyStudios, and those are hooked up to touchscreens. So I'm wondering if you have any advice for UIs with Linux.
Well, my QControls aren't Windows-based.
Okay.
They're class-based, but they should be able to be used in Linux too. There's nothing in the QControl tool, the the base QControl Toolkit, there's nothing that's out of the ordinary from regular LabVIEW. Now, some of these QControls do use actual like Windows DLL calls and other fancy things like that other company's, the Alldredge Engineering's multi-touch. But those are special cases. Most of the ones that I've created are just base LabVIEW code. And now I haven't tested them in a Linux system, but I don't think there should be anything that's stopping you.
One thing I'll add where you had the multi-touch for safety is I do have a number of customer systems that are touch panel based. And what we always have to do, because they do want the screens going off when they're not used, you don't want someone touching the screen to turn it back on and change the state of the system. So in a number of cases, we either require a double click or we have a screensaver that comes up so that when you press it, you might hit the button that turns off the screensaver, but you're not going to hit one of the buttons that'll change the state of the system.
That makes sense. One way that might be a way around that too is to actually purposely have a pop-up VI that comes up in front and stays there until it's clicked on once and then dismisses or something like that. There's lots of ways to combat that. Any other questions? Or if you have any other kind of like UI, UX questions, like how would I do this in LabVIEW? I get that from all my coworkers all the time. One example of a question that I got from them is they had an array and they're like, can you set a tip strip for each element of the array? And I said, well, not really. There might be some ways to kind of fake that out because you can watch as you're moving your mouse around and find out what element you're over and then set your tip strip. But that might not always work because as soon as you move, your tip strip's gonna go away or, potentially. So on his, I said, well, you could make a string control look like a tip strip and on the mouse enter, change it to visible. On the mouse leave of that control of that array, have it disappear, and then have it follow your mouse around the position as you're moving it around and set the value of that string control. So even though you might think, okay, well, that's kind of archaic, I think that there's workarounds to just about anything, any kind of UI element you would want to do in LabVIEW. There's probably a way to do it. You just have to be a little more creative, maybe. So, but as I build these things, I'll build some of these things into QControls because then all of the event-based stuff that goes into controlling it is now hidden under the hood. And then the way that QControls work, you'll have to look them up when you get a chance, is you pass a reference to a constructor and then you get a class wire out and you treat that class wire like it's a reference wire from then on out in your program. You can save that wire just like you would save a reference wire, in your state, however you're planning on saving and keeping track of your state, and then control that QControl that way. But it makes it so that all of the functionality that would have been mixed in with your business logic is encapsulated and separated from your business logic, but then it makes it so that it's reusable in other places so that you can then take that and just, plop it in another UI and use it. So, question?
Do you use the function of turning on and off the front panel display much so you can speed things up in the background?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Deferring panel updates, you have to do a lot. Again, with Panel Manager, deferring panel updates doesn't work for a VI that's in a subpanel. But Panel Manager has built-in tools that then, when you set it in a lower level VI that's in a subpanel, it automatically instructs the top level thing to actually carry out the defer and undefer. So it's a very nice tool. I definitely recommend it. That tool, the Panel Manager, is a tool by MGI. I worked with them I didn't work for them, but I worked with them for a number of years and just love that tool. That's how I develop all of my UIs whenever I'm using Actor Framework. Now with Panel Manager, there is a non-Actor Framework component So you can use it in DQMH or any other application. The way that the actor framework one works is you actually inherit from a panel class. And so you get a panel actor. If you don't want to do that, then you can use the panels and there's BIs that are not for panel actors that are just for basic BIs that you can then use with any of the other frameworks. So definitely recommend it especially if you're starting to get complicated UIs, you don't want a big monolithic UI. You should start separating it into subpanels, kind of chunking it out, and doing it that way. Another benefit that I love of Panel Manager and Panel Actors is you can design your actor UI and then decide where you want it. So you can have it be in a subpanel and then say, okay, well, now I want it to show up as a dialog, and you can basically switch what panel it is at runtime. And that's how I handle stuff like making docking and undocking panels. Is I have a button that says, okay, undock this one, and it switches it from being in a subpanel to being its own window, just in a few VIs. So it's really nice.
Do you have a good example or know of one for ways to do resizing? You were talking a lot about using panels and stuff. Do you know of something that's already out there that's easy to go find and kind of build up skills on that?
Well, not exactly. When I do resizing, I try to separate my panel into sections so that there really is only one control per pane. And then I set that pane to be resizable. And then I have to make sure, okay, one of the properties that you can set on a splitter is if you want it to stick to the right or stick to the left or top or bottom. So then I decide, okay, is this going to be a control that can grow in both directions? Or is this a control that can only grow in one direction? Or is this a control that shouldn't grow and should just sit there? And so stuff like, buttons, booleans, stuff like that, maybe they don't grow. Single line string controls, numeric controls, maybe they only grow in the horizontal direction. They don't grow in the vertical direction. Maybe in a string control, maybe you do have a big one that has a paragraph. Maybe it can grow in both directions. Tables, charts, they can grow in both directions. So we just kind of have a set of style guidelines that we adopt to decide how we're going to do that. Now, that being said, there is a toolkit out there that I've seen but haven't used that takes snapshots. And so you basically rearrange your screen, and then you tell this toolkit to go save a snapshot. And it saves a snapshot of where all the controls are and all their sizes. And it saves it into some kind of XML, I think. And then you size it down, and you then rearrange it and resize it, and you take another snapshot. Now, what their tool does is it takes the two endpoints that you just snapshotted, and as you're cycling between them, it does the math to resize and reposition everything according to those two endpoints. Now, the reason why resizing doesn't work in LabVIEW, just natively without doing that, is as you're resizing, the two endpoints are where it started and where it ended, not these two defined points. So as you're resizing, moving back and forth, you guys probably have all seen this. As you're resizing back and forth, it starts getting all skew, and because of round-off errors. It rounds off a single pixel, and then all of a sudden it's off over too far, or it's too big in one direction. So, I don't recommend on doing that part, but maybe, I can't remember what the toolkit's called. I'll have to find it. But their toolkit might be a good option, because then you could save these intermediate snapshots, and not just two, you could save a whole bunch of them. And then it could rearrange depending on that. It just take a lot of setup work ahead of time. And maybe that's why it hasn't caught on, is because if you go then add a new control, then you have to redo all of your snapshots, and so it's not an easy thing. Another question.
So if I give on and off images, can I create a Boolean control by scripting or something?
The on and off of what? I'm not
Like if I have, say, like on and off images of a Boolean.
Oh, yeah. You can have multiple decals, right, on a Boolean, an on and off decal. Maybe that is one way to kind of have two, but I think what I was wanting is to be able to programmatically have that be a property where I can just write a image to the button and change it that way. But
Can we save as a control, like save a new control? Because in my project, like I would love to have a similar themed buttons across. So if I can save those controls, it will be very helpful. Is there any way to?
you can create your own custom controls with decals and save them off and reuse them. Look into the control editor. There's also on VIPM.io, there is a tool that lets you edit buttons. It's not like a runtime dynamic thing, but it kind of does some hacky stuff under the hood because it's not stuff that you're supposed to be able to do, but it does help you create new buttons and put graphics into buttons programmatically, at least scripting wise, not runtime, but development time wise. What's that?
An image ring control?
Oh yeah, you could use image ring controls for that too. That's true. I have done that. Cool. Well, thank you very much.